Number 3, Metiria Turei.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. Tēnā koutou te whare. My question is to the Prime Minister and asks, does he stand by all his statements?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Yes.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. When the Prime Minister said, quote, the much more pertinent question to ask is income sufficiency, do people have enough to live on, end quote, does he think that the 40% of all children living in poverty whose parents work have enough to live on?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, well, what I do know is that those families receive working for families. They probably receive an accommodation supplement, and as we know, for 50% of the New Zealand households that earn $60,000 or less, those households pay approximately $2.4 billion in tax and receive approximately $7.4 billion in benefits. So what I can say is the government is supporting those families as best as it can and has done so over very difficult economic conditions.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Is the Prime Minister saying that children whose parents work full-time and get their full suite of entitlements from working for families will have incomes above the poverty threshold because of those additional payments?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, they may do. To give you an example, if somebody earned $40,000, lived in Auckland and had 3 children, then the very good question to ask is what is the equivalent take-home pay of their next-door neighbour, equivalent earnings of their next-door neighbour if they have no children? And the answer is $73,000. So in principle, Mr Speaker, I think the government does give a fair degree of redistribution to those families.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree with the analysis from the Parliamentary Library showing that an Auckland family with 2 children working full-time on $15 an hour with their full working for families entitlements is still $132 a week below the poverty threshold?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, no.
Point of order, sir.
Point of order, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I seek leave to table the research from the Parliamentary Library dated 1st July 2012 provided to me, which shows this $132 deficit.
Order. The document's been described and it was utilised in the question. Leave us sought to table that particular question.
Supplementary question.
Or that particular paper prepared by the Parliamentary Library. Is there any objection to it being tabled? There is.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, the Honourable David Parker.
To the Prime Minister. Wrong David.
Oh, sorry, wrong David. Honourable David Cunliffe.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Prime Minister, on what date was he, his office or his officials first advised of the alleged sex crime by a Malaysian diplomat, and what action did he then take?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I was advised soon after the incident took place, so that would have been sometime in the latter part of May, that there was an incident involving someone from the Malaysian High Commission. I wasn't given details of it, that it was a sexual offence, just that there was an issue with a member there. I was formally advised of all of the details on Saturday.
Supplementary, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker, was the Prime Minister advised that New Zealand ministers or officials may have tacitly or actively sanctioned the use of diplomatic immunity by the Malaysian government?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, no. On the Saturday when I was advised that the topic was going to be in the Herald on Sunday, I was advised that New Zealand had issued a third-party notice, which is the formal notification for the fact that New Zealand wanted diplomatic immunity waived, and I was advised that was refused by the Malaysians.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Prime Minister consider it acceptable that children whose parents are working full-time, earning $15 an hour, well above the minimum wage, to still be living in poverty and going without the basics, or do these people just not exist for him?
Right Honourable Prime
Mr.
Minister.
Speaker, well, firstly, the member was attempting to table a document that was 2 years out of date. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, I haven't denied that there are people in New Zealand who are on low incomes. What I can say is the government, A, is working very hard to support the economy so that more jobs can be created, more opportunities can be created. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, the government invests heavily in education to allow people to move up into more highly skilled jobs. But thirdly, Mr. Speaker, I go back to the basic point. The government has invested in the worst of economic times to ensure those most at need continue to get working for families payments, income-related rents and a variety of other support mechanisms. New Zealand has, for instance, as a minimum wage, the highest minimum wage in the OECD as an average compared to the rest of the countries is 50% of the average wage. Mr. Speaker, the government is as generous as it practically can be at this time.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
In light of the research provided by the Parliamentary Library yesterday, Prime Minister, showing that families who work full-time for $15 an hour are still $132 a week below the poverty threshold, what guarantee can he give those families and the thousands of children who live in those families that that family on $15 an hour now will be out of poverty through work within 2 years?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
The first guarantee I can give them is their household won't be $500 a year worse off because of the ETS that the Green Party would bring in. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, I can guarantee them that they are far more likely to have a job because under a Greens government they would not. And thirdly, Mr. Speaker, I can guarantee that family that their community would be safer because we're a political party that both believes in law and order and believes in national intelligence agencies to protect those families, unlike the Green Party.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister finally take responsibility for the fact that the children of ordinary New Zealand families, both those who work and those who are out of work, are going without warm homes, without proper food, without decent clothing, because he has allowed them to fall impossibly behind and neither he nor his supposed team are working for them at all?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
The reason the member is getting no traction in the public domain with that argument is because New Zealanders know it's factually incorrect. If this was a government that in the worst of economic times, in the recession and the global financial crisis, had cut the main support mechanisms for those families, including things like working for families, they might have some traction. But in fact, this government didn't do that, it borrowed the money. If this wasn't a government that was working hard to ensure that New Zealand families have jobs, I could accept that argument, but in fact this government's been very focused on that. If this government hadn't insulated nearly 300,000 homes, will there be one as leader of the opposition on the 21st of September? Mr. Speaker, this is a government that has, and Grant's counting the days, don't worry son, 79 hours.
Order. The answer's now gone on long enough, but it's an example of what happens when we get interjection. Question number 4, Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. Does he agree with Infometrics that after the Canterbury rebuild peaks, the New Zealand economy will experience a hangover with slow income